Right, good morning. It's another beautiful day in Sonoma County. It is Wednesday, April 14th. I'm going to start off with a very important shout out to my wife Allison. Happy birthday today. We'll celebrate tonight. I want to start with some business. First, a mea culpa. Several videos ago, we mentioned that we would be doing asymptomatic testing at our walk-in care center. That's not our same-day care, but the walk-in care center on Mendocino Avenue. I think we spoke out of turn. Turns out they have a lot of background work to do before they're capable of accepting that. So on April 26th, they tell us they will be available both at Santa Rosa, Petaluma, and Novato walk-in clinics to do asymptomatic testing for our patients. They are currently doing the asymptomatic pre-op patients, but they're going to add this. So that's coming a couple weeks down the road. So let's talk about COVID. That's why we're here. First of all, you probably know that the tiers for vaccine eligibility is soon to go away. Governor Newsom has mandated that as of tomorrow, everybody will be available, no longer have exclusions, and that's everybody over the age of 16. It is important to remember that 16 and 17-year-olds can only get the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna was not approved for them. So that'll be important. We will usually have both vaccines here, but everybody needs to be aware of that. And I'm told that in Epic, there will be a parental consent form specifically for this available tomorrow. And of course, they'll have the consent forms at the vaccination sites. Another reminder, as we're getting more and more patients come into the office, happy to tell us that they've been vaccinated by the COVID vaccines and that they want to get it in their record. We've been asked to please do not manually enter the vaccinations into the immunization record. As you probably know, anybody who gets a vaccine in the state of California, that institution is required to feed that up to the state registry. The state registry has been a little bit overwhelmed, so they're slow to populate our charts, but the design is such that that will ultimately populate our charts electronically. That will be the most accurate, and they ask us not to put manual entries because we may end up with dual entries and perhaps even conflicting information. So leave that alone. And then the last thing we always have to touch on vaccine supply. It's up and down, and I'm sorry to say it's a little bit down right now. There's been a lot of turmoil with the J&J vaccine, with production, and that's deflected a lot of vaccine away from California and away from Sonoma County and Sutter. So I checked this morning with Jonathan. I'm told we have enough to do some first doses this week, but as of next Monday, it's going to be a day by day. So still frustrated by our inability to fully utilize the system we've set up and get down this path farther. So Gary, let's turn back to the epidemiology. It's been 2 weeks since we took a look at it. I remember a month ago you predicted we were going to have a third spike, a third bump. But I caught your quotation in the Press Democrat this week. You were quoted saying you're very optimistic that we wouldn't have a spike. So tell us, where are we at right now?
So yeah, I think some states are having trouble with the third spike, and you're seeing that in parts of the U.S. And I think hopefully in Sonoma County we'll be well positioned for that. So let me show you one slide. This is Michigan. Michigan's been in the news. It's one of the hot spots in the U.S. And you can see that their third wave is actually worse than their second wave. It's approaching that, and it's really been difficult in Michigan. There's a lot of reasons for that, with masking and public health, and as well as vaccinations. The next slide, slide 2, is kind of interesting. I like this slide. It comes from NPR just this morning. These are 15 states have hotspots. 15 states are in the red where they have more than 25 cases per 100,000. And if you look at California, we're not even in the orange tier, we're in the yellow tier. So I think California's been doing really well. The next slide, these two slides are going to be local. This is California, slide number 3. And you can see that our numbers are very low, and we're doing great. And then in Sonoma County, looks very similar to the California one. The Sonoma County slide shows that our numbers are very low, and they're low for a number of reasons. First of all, we've had about almost 6% of people in Sonoma County test positive for COVID. So there's some natural immunity that comes with that. And also, we've had 55% of people who have received at least one dose of the vaccine, 35% fully vaccinated, and people over the age of 70, more than 85% have been fully vaccinated.
So I think that puts us well ahead of the state of California and certainly the national level as well.
Yeah, we're almost double California's vaccination rate. So whatever vaccine we've gotten in Sonoma County, it's been put out there. very quickly it's been distributed. And I think that's really helped keep our county ahead of it. Also, Dr. Mays has kind of very carefully opened up our county. So restaurants and churches and outdoor eating has been cautiously done. And I don't see people not wearing masks here. People are really good about that.
Yeah.
So we're careful about social distancing. And I think that's positioned Sonoma County very well. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a bump. We're going to see a small outpatient bump, but it's not going to swamp the hospitals.
You know, before we pass up on the vaccines, it would be very interesting if you all were to go to the Sonoma County vaccine site. You know, we tend to think of Kaiser and Sutter and St. Joe's doing all the work, but you'll find, you know, Kaiser and Sutter are certainly number 1 and 2. But there's probably a list of 20 different organizations that have been part of this vaccination effort. Sonoma County Medical Association, entirely voluntary, has given about 75% of what we've given. So it's very good to see. It's really a broad community effort that's done this.
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of pulled together on this as best they can.
Yeah.
And so the hardest part is vaccine availability, as you mentioned before. If we had more vaccine, we would even be above 55%. You know, we think that herd immunity is 70%. And if you add the 55%, let's say you add the 6% to that, we're over 60%. How many asymptomatic infections have there been where people have developed immunity? I think we're approaching herd immunity, and I think in our county, that's why our numbers look so good.
Good. Well, let's switch a little bit. So this is very topical in the news. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was pulled from the market yesterday, paused, I should say, and the CDC is having an emergency meeting this morning to address the state of the future use of that. What's going on here?
Yeah, so Johnson & Johnson vaccine is in the news, and I think if you're a CEO of Johnson & Johnson, you don't want this kind of publicity. But there's been some thrombosis with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And I want to kind of take a step back and give everyone perspective, because you need a little bit of explanation for this. The problem is not the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's the platform they're using. So we think it's the adenovirus platform. So in the US, there are 3 vaccines being used. Pfizer, Moderna are the mRNA vaccines, and then Johnson & Johnson is the adenovirus platform. It's the only adenovirus platform in the US. There's a 4th vaccine that's going to be released pretty soon. That's a protein-based vaccine, the Novartis. And so that's not an adenovirus vaccine. But let me show you this slide. This slide shows in the world where the adenovirus, who the adenovirus vaccines are. And the AstraZeneca, the one in the UK and Europe, has seen some thrombosis, and the Johnson & Johnson here. So just like you said today, the FDA is having an emergency meeting to talk about this and to understand where these cases have come from, and it doesn't really represent a safety issue with the vaccine. And that's why the FDA and the CDC have paused all Johnson & Johnson vaccine across the country. The next slide is going to tell you about the science. So I've kind of jumped into this. This is what I know. The big buzzword for the thrombosis that's happening is VIT, vaccine-induced thrombosis and thrombocytopenia. And we're seeing some thrombocytopenia in the cases. In the US, 6 cases of central venous sinus thrombosis, which is not very common. That's actually a thrombosis in the dura of the brain. So it's a very uncommon cause of thrombosis. It's not a DVT. It's not a pulmonary emboli. It's not a peripheral vein thrombosis. And it's associated with thrombocytopenia. All 6 cases were women, and it was 6 cases out of 6.85 million doses in the US. So less than 1 case in a million in the US. All women age 18 to 48. So an interesting age group, healthy. It happened about 6 to 13 days after vaccination, and there's been 1 fatality in the US. And so the FDA is pausing it. They're not canceling it, but it might get canceled. But right now it's under investigation. Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine, also the adenovirus vaccine, we knew a month or so ago that they had of 34 million doses, almost 170 cases of, again, central venous vein thrombosis, and there was some splenic vein thrombosis in the gut. So those are very uncommon thrombosis. But in many, but not all of the cases, thrombocytopenia. So we think that the mechanism is that there's an antibody developed to platelet factor 4, very similar to heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. And so there seems to be the adenovirus platform triggers this platelet 4 antibody production, and that drops the platelet count. But counterintuitively, when you lower the platelet count in this scenario, it becomes thrombotic.
Yeah.
It's a prothrombotic state. I think it's going to be tough for the credibility of Johnson & Johnson to recover, and I think it's going to be tough for the adenovirus platform.
So this is all over the newspapers, and patients are reading about it. How relevant is to us? Are we going to get barrage with phone calls? I mean, how many Johnson & Johnsons have been used in Sonoma County?
So I imagine the primary care docs are going to get a ton of questions on, hey, can I get a CBC? I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and there's no indication to get a CBC in an asymptomatic person after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. In the US, 9% of the vaccine doses were Johnson & Johnson. But in Sonoma County, like you said, California didn't get much.
Yeah.
Sonoma County, only 3%. So 3% or 10,000 doses total in a population of almost 500,000.
Yeah.
I think that our rate is going to be incredibly low. I'd be surprised if we see one case at all in Sonoma County.
And I seem to recall also that from a patient perspective, the people who might be affected would be the people who received it in the last 3 weeks. So
Right.
probably a lot of those 10,000 got it prior to that. So really, it should not be an issue for Sonoma County. It would be newspaper worthy if there was a case.
Right. A
Very
single
newspaper.
case would be someone who's received the vaccine within 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so after that, you're in the clear. But the rate is going to be very low, but it's just going to heighten anxiety at a time that people are just tired.
Yeah. Well, I think that let's switch to what is going well. Somebody at some point in the USA made some good decisions to purchase Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, because these have been really clean, haven't they? I mean, we're not seeing any negative news that's helped with the credibility of getting the vaccine.
Yeah, we were really impressed with the efficacy profile of the Pfizer Moderna, 94, 95%. Even more impressive than that is the safety profile. So we are not seeing any thrombosis issues with the Pfizer Moderna vaccine, which is great. And so I think that's really helpful to kind of put in context that the two vaccines that were really the workhorse in the United States have been incredibly effective, incredibly safe.
Okay.
We just have to do everything else right with the masking and the social distancing and the washing our hands.
So I do want to point out one thing for educational purposes of something I personally have seen in the office. I was puzzled about it, and I suspect many of my partners are also, but this delayed reaction. Can you talk about this with the mRNA vaccines?
Yeah, so we've talked about this a little bit in some of our leadership groups, and I want to thank Sean Franklin for sending us this New England Journal article.
Okay.
The last slide I'm going to show is this delayed local reaction from the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. Now, typically, about 8 days later, patients will call you saying, wow, my arm hurts. Where I had the reaction, it's warm, it's red, it's tender. The most important thing to know is it's not cellulitis. It's just a vaccine reaction, probably a T-cell reaction, which is why it's a little bit delayed. It resolves in 4 to 5 days, so it only needs conservative topical treatment.
Okay, so topical steroids, antihistamines, ice packs, give it time.
Yeah, very conservative therapy. It's going to go away. You don't need these patients to be on an antibiotic, even though they may want one.
Okay.
And you can let them know that we've noticed it, we're following it, and it's in the medical literature. And for anyone interested, we can send out that New England Journal article. But thank you, Sean Franklin, for sharing that. These photos come from that article that Sean shared with us from the leadership group.
Good. And it's important to note from those photos that if somebody were to get it on the first dose, they may or may not get it on the second dose. It's certainly not worse, and it's not going to preclude them from getting the second dose.
Right, it's not common, and it's not predictable.
Okay.
I think, Gary, it's like the tetanus shot. Some people get a real reaction from the tetanus shot. It looks just like that.
Okay. Good. Thanks. I'm gonna, a lot of these videos are viewed by the general public, but we've also found that this is just a very effective medium for us to communicate with our medical group. So I'm gonna do a little business right now. And the next slide is just a reminder. I mentioned this at our last all group meeting that if we would encourage all of you to go on to the ADP website, and you see down the bottom there, go paperless. The group is still spending thousands and thousands of dollars on an annual basis for stamps and stuffing envelopes. So this would be most efficient if we could all do that. Next, I'm always looking for ways to everybody to have more knowledge about their business, close some of the loops, particularly around billing and coding. And so this first slide is a website that is personalized to you. I will be sending a link out to you. I've sent this out several times over the years, but some of the newer providers might not be familiar with this. So this is a link to a site that tracks your productivity. It's updated within days, so as you see patients on a Monday, probably by Wednesday or Thursday, all those billings will appear on this site. I would recommend you just hit the help at the top that'll walk you through how to use this. It's a good way to track some experimentation. If you experiment by building something a certain way, within days later you can get some feedback on that. I will warn you that this tracks everything that's billed under your name. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're compensated for it. So for an example, adult vaccinations, there's going to be vaccination codes that we do not get credit for. Or for primary care physicians, it's going to track all your capitated visits as well. It doesn't distinguish those. And then my last slide is a similar website. It's a link that I'll be sending out with coding. And so this is for provider coding feedback. And it informs you whenever they do make some changes to the codes that you have supplied on your counter. They're going to give you that feedback and tell you what they changed. This one is very important to go to the help first and read about all the abbreviations that they use. And I think one of the nice things about this, if you look at the fourth column from the left, it says email. So if you see an encounter where you might disagree or don't understand what they've done, you click that and just put in the verbiage of what you're asking, and it automatically sends an email to the coding department about that specific incident. So I'll get those out in email to you tomorrow or the next day shortly, so you have advantage of that. I would suggest you take these links and make them favorites so you can go back and check on them easily. They don't require you to sign in. So that's all we've got for today. Again, thanks for your time. I hope this is useful.